Monument Valley is a region of the Colorado Plateau characterized by a cluster of sandstone buttes, the largest reaching 1,000 feet above the valley floor. The most famous of these buttes, along with the highest concentration, are located in northeastern Arizona along the Utah-Arizona border. More specifically, the area is protected under the jurisdiction of the Navajo Nation, which is the largest Indian reservation in the U.S., comprising about 16 million acres in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. There are actually a number of well-known natural landmarks within the tribal land, but Monument Valley is no doubt the most well-known of them all, and I think you could even make an argument that it's one of the most famous landscapes in America. It's been the backdrop of many movies and TV shows, and even inspired Ornament Valley from the Cars films. As many of you know, I double as a theme park enthusiast as well, and I was always especially intrigued by this place because you can visit a man-made recreation of Ornament Valley in Cars Land at Disney's California Adventure Park. So let's get started. Here's what we did during our few hours we spent at Monument Valley. First up, I wanted to stop at a very iconic photo location right outside the tribal park on the Utah side of the border. This is Forrest Gump Hill, the location where Forrest Gump ended his epic run in the 1994 film. It's this really cool shot of the road heading straight forwards for what seems like forever. I normally don't stop in places like these because I don't carry a zoom-in lens on these trips, and that's usually what photographers use to make these spots look good. However, I was surprised by how awesome it looked on an iPhone, let alone a GoPro. It was an absolutely stunning spot, and I love how abruptly the rocky spires and buttes jut up from the landscape. Usually, there aren't too many cars driving along this section of road at one time, so if you can, run along this thing for a little while and watch how trippy it looks when it appears you've made no distance whatsoever. From here, we made our way into Arizona and immediately entered the Navajo Tribal Park. There's a small fee you'll have to pay at the ticket windows, $8 a person to be exact, which is definitely worth it for what you're getting. Right away, you'll come across the park's visitor center, and normally I'd say you can pass these up, except this one is pretty awesome. For one, they're selling all sorts of really cool Navajo jewelry, carpets, and merchandise in there that actually look very nice. But more importantly, it's home to perhaps my favorite overlook of Monument Valley. This is ironic since you haven't even gotten on the park's Scenic Drive yet, which is the main attraction here. Nonetheless, you get an epic view of the three most iconic rock formations in the area, the West and East Mittens and Merrick Butte. Now, all three of these are buttes, but you'll notice something particularly special about the first two, and that's that they have what appears to be thumbs. I never knew why these things were called mittens before my visit, but now I definitely get it. Don't overlook this spot even though it's located prior to the scenic route because it's a pretty awesome view and the most highly elevated one at that. Now, I've mentioned the park's Scenic Drive a handful of times now, so what is it? Basically, it's a 45-mile long route through the valley, all of it being rough and unpaved. I was admittedly pretty nervous going into this with our 2x2 rental vehicle, and honestly, even though we made it out okay, it was probably the riskiest road we drove all trip. When we went, most of the flat sections of the road were fine. It was just when you make your way downhill and uphill and park in the parking lots that are very, very rough. That said, I'm glad we got to see this as it felt like a pretty wild adventure and it allowed us to really appreciate Monument Valley. Along the route are a bunch of different places to stop and view the rock formations. No hikes or anything like that, just viewpoints. We didn't stop at all of them as some were located right by each other and weren't far enough apart to highlight much difference. But the majority were worth it to me, including our first spot, which is a dedicated pull-off for the aforementioned West and East Mittens. Aside from the elevation difference, it's pretty similar to the first viewpoint at the visitor center, but any opportunity I get to see these things, I'm taking. They were definitely the most impressive rock formations in the park in my opinion. Plus, you'll probably want to brake immediately after tackling the roughest part of the 45-mile scenic road. It was at least comforting knowing that conditions didn't worsen throughout the drive, and once you made it past this first bit, you'll be good for the rest. Literally another minute or two away is a pullout for Merrick Butte, which is another quick stop, but really cool to get a closer perspective. Though it may not have the thumb that the Mittens have, it's otherwise just as stunning and sticks out as dramatically within the landscape. Another super short drive away was pullout number 3, and this is the first one that highlights rock formations you hadn't seen up to this point. These are the Three Sisters, a trio of rocky spires all at different sizes. Jokingly, I was saying that the middle sister likely gets made fun of a lot by the other sisters because it's a whole lot shorter than the rest. But I thought this looked really cool, definitely a cool stop. Probably the most underrated viewpoint from the scenic route can be accessed by a tiny spur road, probably the smoothest section of the entire drive. This is to access John Ford Point, which I liked a lot because of the smooth red badlands down at the bottom that create a satisfying foreground of the buttes in the background. There's a lot of room for you to walk around at this one and some really cool pictures you can take. Plus, I noticed a fry bread stand here, which is a traditional food found within these Indian reservations. I was hoping to try some here, but unfortunately the stand was closed when we visited. We would have the opportunity to get our hands on some later on in the trip though, and I thought it was really good, so if it's open, definitely be sure to grab some. Also worth noting is in the other direction from the main view, you get another cool look look at the Three Sisters, and I honestly prefer this perspective more than the dedicated pullout for it. All the more proof that you don't really need to stop at each of these if you're short on time. From here, we continue driving to the far end of the scenic road, which then loops around back the way you came. At the absolute furthest point, there's a small pull-off to see the totem pole, which is a distant rocky spire that is actually a heavily eroded remnant of one of these buttes. It was probably my least favorite viewpoint, and if I came back here, I'd likely skip it personally. But I felt like we owed it to ourselves to stop since there hadn't been many opportunities to do so in a while. Following this, we then made our way to Artist Point, probably my favorite place we stopped at on the route. It's a more distant overlook, but really quite beautiful as you get to look out over the park's more iconic rock features again. From here though, the mittens don't look so much like mittens because the thumbs aren't visible unless you're facing north. Again, stop at the visitor center or the first pull-off if you're looking to see that. We proceeded to complete the loop and then exited the way we came up the rockiest section of the drive. I was relieved our vehicle made it out okay and grateful we got to see such a cool, remote place like this. For $8 a person, it's absolutely worth a visit here, but in my opinion, you shouldn't go out of your way to come. We were in and out in less than 2 hours, and I wouldn't exactly say we rushed it either. There simply isn't a whole lot to do, even if the scenery is worth seeing. I'd say if you're driving between Moab or one of its nearby national parks to elsewhere in Arizona, you should definitely make a short detour. Otherwise, there's a lot more places in the Southwest I'd recommend visiting over this one that are both more impressive and have a lot more recreational opportunities. That said, I would come back if I were able to book a private tour to access the top of Hunts Mesa. This is by a long shot the most expansive view of Monument Valley, and if you've paid close attention, it's also what I used as my thumbnail image for this area. I don't know the specifics for how one can experience this, but I know it's not super easy or cheap either. If you've been to Monument Valley before, let me know what you thought of it, and if any of you have miraculously been to Hunts Mesa, I'd love to know more details and whether you thought it was worth it or not. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like and subscribe to Travel Dash so you don't miss any content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye guys.